I'm here with my friend Fahad, Fahad Yunus, that I met in Pakistan when I lived and worked there. He's now in his third stint living in Australia, living and working in Australia. He's been there for, in this stint, this last stint, he's been there for about over a year. He's going to share some insights of what's happening on the ground in Australia, how people are coping with the pandemic, how the government is supporting its citizens. Fahad, you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
All right, so hi everyone. I'm Mohammed Fahad Yusuf, and I work with as a health and safety business partner. I see their Australia and their New Zealand operations, and primarily I'm an engineer. I've worked all over the world. I've done projects in Saudi Arabia. I've done projects in Dubai. I've done projects in Pakistan, and I've done a few projects in Australia and and in New Zealand. And this is my background, and I'm a mechanical engineer. My field of expertise are now in have ventured into compliance and sustainability. That is why I am looking after health, safety, environment, and sustainability with this company. This is a Swedish company, and it's a listed company which is listed in New York Stock Exchange and in Swedish Stock Exchange. So yeah, that is my brief background, and I've got more than 10 years of experience in the industry, and primarily I've stayed with the same industry since my graduation. So that is my brief introduction.
That's great.
Right.
I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to someone in Australia is because Australia and Canada have a lot in common, right? We have similar populations. We have about 6 million more people, I think, than you do. You have about 32 million. We have 38 million people.
Right.
But I mean, Australia, I don't think most people realize when looking at a map, but Australia is big as the US in terms of land mass, right? So quite a huge country with a small population, much like Canada. A very diverse population centered in the urban centers, much like Canada. Similar in terms of GDP, similar in terms of resources. So I thought that it was a good comparison to compare how the pandemic is affecting Australia versus Canada. So give a little bit of background. So Canada now has over 83,000 cases. Australia only has 7,000 cases. Canada has over 6,400 deaths. Australia has 102 deaths. So, you know, it's remarkable how different the impact has been in Canada versus the US. Now, from my understanding, early on, we, you know, were very similar in January, February of 2020 in how we were dealing with the outbreak, and the numbers were similar. But what happened is that the travel advisories and the travel isolation happened really early in Australia, and Canada delayed. So the first stage of transmission, which is travel, we had a much larger effect in Canada than Australia did. Can you share any insights on that?
All right, so a bit of background about this pandemic and about Australia in general. So this is this coronavirus. This is the mutation of SARS. So this is SARS-2, which is known as coronavirus. It has got about, right now, they have identified more than 20 strains of it. So that is what this is. And it's the RO, the reproduction or the transfer rate is almost the same as SARS-1. So that is a bit of background about this virus. And all right, and the other thing is when we see Australia, so Australia is an island. Canada is not an island. It is isolated. It's in the southern hemisphere, and it has opposite seasons. And it is that the term is upside down. So pretty much Australia is an upside down country. So that is a bit about Australia. Australia is a fairly new country. It's a fairly new continent. It's almost 150 to 200 years old. And it's a very new civilization, very new establishment. The cities in Australia, they are only scattered along the coastlines, most of the cities. And the per million population of Australia, that is one of the lowest in the world. And we have got a lot of resources, but again, Australia is an island. It is absolutely isolated from the rest of the world. You can only access Australia via sea or via air. There is no direct land. So that is about Australia. And
that's an important thing to note, Fahad, right? And I say this about, you know, all the hoopla about Are you still there? You've frozen up.
Yes. I'm still here.
Okay. So, all this hoopla that's made about New Zealand, well, I say this about New Zealand as well. It's much easier to clamp down an island of 5 million people like New Zealand.
Exactly.
And Australia, same as well. I mean, Australia is bigger, but, it is still an island. And the only way to get Australia is plane and boat. Versus Canada, we have one of the longest borders in the world with the US, right? So we also had to deal with transmission via car, people coming from the US and crossing the border back and forth. And we were late in clamping down on that. I lost you there for a second. You're back now.
All right. I think we are connected again. Okay, can you hear me, Najib?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, says yes. Continue what you were saying about Australia and New Zealand.
So I was saying that that's a very important thing to note, that both Australia and New Zealand are islands. It's much easier to clamp down an island because you're not having to deal with travel via car across borders like we deal with Canada. Canada has one of the longest the longest unprotected border in the world with the US.
Correct.
And we were late in clamping down on that travel via car and truck pass in and out of both countries, which led to the transmission. And you're right. I mean, in Australia, you guys only had to make sure that nobody came in, and you early on clamped down on travel from China, especially.
Yes, correct. So that is a reason that why we can control the restrictions. We can control the access to Australia and New Zealand, and so New Zealand is pretty much the success story, and the reason being that it's an isolated place and it's a small economy. So that's the number one reason. All right. So since I've made a business continuity plan and contingency plan for my company, so I have more insight. I can tell what is the reality. So the reality is that neither Australia or New Zealand, these countries are not concerned about limiting access and restrictions when it comes to COVID. They just wanted to have a time so that they can ready, they can preempt and they can ready their healthcare system. The model which the world is going to follow is the Sweden model, and that is the herd immunity. And Sweden did not put restrictions in the time of COVID. And if you see the per million case, they had one of the highest, but that is now flattening. So for Corona, it's very important to understand that the strategy is not in finding the cure. The strategy is not in finding the vaccine. If people or scientists come up with the vaccine, either it is not going to be effective or it's going to be too late. So the strategy is to have a herd immunity. However, there's a catch. There's a big catch that if you're not a mathematician or a scientist, you wouldn't understand that. What happens in Pakistan and in Southeast Asia and India is entirely different. And the reason, you see, in Pakistan and India, most of the places did not have any restrictions. So the most pretty much in rural parts of India and Pakistan, almost 100% of the population was infected with Corona, and the death rate was not significant. So why did that happen? That's the question. And the reason is that those countries have a vaccine, BCG, which was given to them at early on stage, and they had multiple courses of hydroxychloroquine. So hydroxychloroquine is not an antibiotic, and what that is, I will come back to later on that later on. And so the world model, the WHO model, the world model is to have a herd immunity. And that is what the world is aiming for. They are aiming for herd immunity. They are aiming for a smart lockdown, more testing, so to have contact tracing, to quarantine a small group of population. This world or countries do not have enough resources to, or even New Zealand or Australia do not have resources to carry on, to go along with the restrictions and or to limit the access. So that is the situation right now.
That's not what I've heard though, Fahad. I've talked to people both in India and Pakistan, and actually Sweden and Norway as well. And Sweden, as you're right, had a very different approach than their neighbor Norway. So actually, in Sweden, they aren't. No country that I know of is, publicly endorsing herd immunity because there's no proof that that will work. So Sweden itself has very clearly said they are not pursuing a herd immunity. Sweden's reasons for not doing a strict lockdown is because they felt that they had a robust healthcare system that could handle the cases that would come. So because you have to remember, in terms of flattening the curve, you're just pushing the numbers down the road, right? You're giving time for your healthcare system to get ready for the cases that are going to come. Sweden's feeling was like, we can handle it right now. So rather than pushing it down in time, we're going to handle our cases right now. Our healthcare system can handle it, and then we know that there'll be less to deal with later on, versus most countries are pursuing the other way: flatten the curve, let the healthcare system prepare for it, let the governments and the communities prepare, and then we'll deal with it when the second wave hits. This is the first that I'm hearing about any sort of immunity due to prior vaccines or anything like that you're sharing with me. I didn't hear that from anybody in Pakistan or India as well.
All right, so I can get back to you with resources. If you want resources, I can give you resources. Or I said, coming back to what coronavirus is, we need to understand what that is. So corona is a virus, and what it does, it breaks hemoglobin. It breaks blood into heme and globin. So when the blood is broken down, then the blood loses its ability to absorb oxygen. So that is why you have suffocation, and that is why people go onto ventilator. And when people go onto ventilator, 99%, or you can say up to more than 90%, the chances are they are not going to come back. All right, so that is what coronavirus is. And what hydroxychloroquine does, it's not an antibiotic. It's not a vaccine. It stops the blood to break down. All right. So, and the reason being that because I've got many friends who are doctors who are working in India and Pakistan, and if you can see, if you want, I can send you resources in Afghanistan, in India and Pakistan, when they tested when they tested the population, more than 75% of the population had coronavirus, and the rest of the 25 and more than 25% were either cured or they were asymptomatic, which they were not showing any symptoms, or the results were inclusive. But the reason is that since they had BCG, that's a vaccine for the polio, which was given to them early on, they had multiple rounds of hydroxychloroquine. They are immune. They will get corona, but they will not show symptoms. That is what is happening. India does not have resources to limit access. Pakistan has no resources to limit restrictions. As of now, if you see videos of shopping malls in Pakistan, if you see videos of, for example, in Lahore, in Ichra market, they are absolutely crowded. If you see per million cases, if you compare the results are not even comparable. If you see the per million deaths in Europe and equate to India and Pakistan would have had a massacre, but nothing is happening. The markets are full. They're crowded. They're even more crowded since the last Ramadan. But since we have much of the population has BCG vaccine, they had multiple rounds of hydroxychloroquine. Most of the population is immune. So that is one thing. And in Sweden, since I've got access to the plan, which the business continuity plan for our head office in Sweden, I've seen the plan. The Sweden has the strategy of discretionary restriction. If someone wants to adhere to, they will have. And if you just see the number of per million deaths, you'll understand what is going on. And now coming back to what is happening now. So in Australia, what is now happening is are one of the biggest company to make vaccines is CSL Behring. So few of my colleagues work there. They are researching and finding a cure, but they are not confident. They say that it is going to take about around 2+ years to get a vaccine. And that is if we consider that Corona has about 15 to 20 strains, but they have already worked it out that they have more than 20 strains, and by the time they get a vaccine, the Corona, the SARS-2 is going to have more strains. And now what is happening in Australia? All of the health workers in Australia are now being given hydroxychloroquine. That is a prophylaxis, and that is not a cure. That's absolutely not a cure. It's not a vaccine. It's not an antibiotic. So after when they are done with the health officials, and just before that, pretty much all of the military of Australian military have been given hydroxychloroquine, and now they're moving to health workers. And since
Please
you
send me
know
the
that
resources because I haven't seen anything. We're not getting anything out in the West because hydroxychloroquine is a
I
huge
will send you the links. I will send you the links.
controversy out here because President
I
Trump
will,
in the U.S. is really pushing it as something that's needed for people to build some sort of, as you said, it's not a cure, but to help people build some immunity to COVID-19. But it's a huge controversy out here. I mean, I haven't seen any
correct.
medical experts in North
Correct.
America express that hydroxychloroquine should be used. So if it's being used in Australia by the military and healthcare workers, I'd love to see that evidence.
Yes. So they're done with military. They're not very open, but they have announced that they will start with the healthcare. That's all over the news. I will send you the link for that. And again, there's a catch with hydroxychloroquine. Since the people who live in Western countries, they have anaphylaxis shock. So people in India and Pakistan are not lactose intolerant. People in Western countries are lactose. They are so people in India. Sorry, so India and Pakistan people are lactose tolerant. Here, people will die of nut allergies. People will die of even with minute allergies. People are lactose intolerant. So that the body reaction is altogether different. Hydroxychloroquine has a catch that it itself can induce cardiovascular complications. And since people here are the allergic reaction is quite different from what we get in India and Pakistan, so that is why they need to have a different regime of giving hydroxychloroquine. So that's a reason it was first given to military, and now they're going to test it on healthcare officials since they're the frontline workers. But it's all over the news here. But I'll definitely send you the links for that. However, so and that works in conjunction with BCG. That is the polio vaccine, and BCG is not given in Western countries. So the polio vaccine is not a vaccine to counter polio. It's a different vaccine which gives you immunity for a wide range of strains of which are very similar to the polio vaccine. And again, BCG is not given in Western countries. So you need to have multiple rounds of hydroxychloroquine, and you need to be given BCG at a younger age, and you need to have a very good immunity against allergic reaction. Only then you are immune to corona. And if you combine that, and if you see the stats per million, and you see what is going on in India, India has no resources. We know Pakistan has no resources in controlling their population. So, and we have seen a massacre in pretty much in Spain. We have seen a massacre in Italy. So that all comes together and makes sense what is going on.
Well, actually, I'm still confused because you're saying that in India and Pakistan, because when they were younger, they got this polio vaccine so that they can handle the hydroxychloroquine. But then if in Australia, people have not had that BCG vaccine and they don't have the tolerance, how is it that they're being administered it in Australia then?
All right.
How would it be effective then?
All right. So that's a very good question. So BCG. So a lot of population in Australia already has BCG because Australia has a very young immigrant population. So people like me who just came in Australia 10 or 15 years ago, they already have BCG in their systems. So BCG does not it does not limit your allergic reaction. Allergic reaction is that due to many strains and many viruses and bacteria in India and Pakistan, people who have lived along, people who live in India and Pakistan, their allergy reaction is entirely different to other parts of the world. And the other reason is that if you see the population, around 40 to 50% of the population, which is right now in Australia, has BCG because because of the younger immigration population, and most of the immigration happened from India, Pakistan, China. So they had BCG in the system. Whereas in Canada, Canada has a fairly young immigrant population, but Canada is an old country. A lot of immigrants came to Canada from England, from USA. So around it is, if I can guess, not more than 10 to 20% of the population of Canadian population has BCG. So yeah, so around at least 50% of Australian population has BCG because since we had a lot of massive immigration from India, Pakistan, and China, and again, the other reason is a lot of people in Australia, they work to and fro from Asian subcontinent. So that is why Australia is the only country who is going to go for the trial, or you can say they are going towards hydroxychloroquine officially, and they are going to give it to their health workers. You will not see the hydroxychloroquine given to people in USA, and you are never going to see in Canada because it induces cardiovascular complication. And it has
Okay,
to be
so
tested.
let's say, you know, we take that for face value. I mean, I do think that, you know, the amount of diseases and outbreaks that happen in countries like India and Pakistan, I believe that, you know, it does make sense to believe that there could be some immunity build up from there, from all the different vaccines and treatments they've had to have for all the different diseases and outbreaks that happen in those countries. And then, yeah, okay, so let's say, I'm not actually sure, I'll look into what the population, the immigration numbers are from those countries into Canada versus Australia. I don't, my guess would be that they're, you know, you're probably right, Australia has more immigrants coming from India and Pakistan and China than they would be to Canada. We'll have to look at those numbers as well. I still don't, so if only that population that has the BCG vaccine can tolerate the treatment, the hydroxychloroquine treatment, then what about the rest of the population?
All right. So no, that's a good question. All right. So if you take my example, I had, as per my medical record, I have taken hydroxychloroquine more than 8 to 10 times in my lifetime. So just imagine how many times an average Pakistani or Indian has this treatment. Because whenever you got a fever in Pakistan, doctor would give you as a prophylaxis this treatment. And coming back to the original question, what will happen to the rest of the population? So that's $1 million question. When I did the business continuity or contingency plan in context with coronavirus, I announced that our protocols for corona are not going to change for SRBLOI. Even though the government has eased restrictions in Australia, government has decreased restrictions in New Zealand, our safety protocols are not going to change. So especially for the people, for senior manager who are working in they are working from home. I have not let them, I have not given permission to come to office and especially so most of our senior managers were born and bred in Australia, and they suffer from one or more diseases. Most of them suffer from cardiovascular diseases. So I have not given permissions to them to come to office. So that's a risk-based approach. And since I'm the person who is responsible for health, safety, sustainability, and environment for the company, so that is what I have briefed the board of directors and to my company. So that is what is doing in Australia and New Zealand. We are still having a risk-based approach. So for example, a person like me who had more than 8 to 10 rounds of hydroxychloroquine in my life, and I've had BCG in my childhood. Even I'm exposed. There is no evidence, there is no data which can tell me that if I get coronavirus, I'm going to survive. There is no data. The data is inconclusive at this time. Even we have a lot of data which is coming from India and Pakistan. It is not consolidated. So it is not up to standard which can be consolidated. So we are only moving and all these things are based on assumptions. But since the data we have now is very enormous, so we can have a calculated guess, or we can have a risk-based approach, and we can see the patterns which are, so now we can only see the patterns. So the patterns which are coming from India, and the patterns which are coming from Pakistan, patterns which are coming from Sweden and from Spain and Italy, we can work on them. But still, the data is not conclusive enough. And that, again, now the question is, since the data is very inconclusive, so what will happen next? So pretty much Australia is going towards a second wave of coronavirus. We are seeing more and more cases. Since the government is easing restrictions in both Australia and New Zealand, we are seeing more cases coming in for corona. So again, the only strategy is more testing and risk-based approach. That is only what we have.
What is the overall feelings now if restrictions are being limited? Are people in favor of restriction limited because the economic effects of the lockdowns, or are people still saying no, let's be cautious and hold off on lifting restrictions? How are the citizens feeling?
All right, so that's all right. So now coming towards to the ground reality. The ground reality is people do not like restrictions. There was a protest. There is a protest in CBD, in around the CBD area of Melbourne, and the people were protesting to ease the restrictions, and people are not adhering to. People are not complying to the restrictions. Australia is policing restrictions. Australia is giving out fines to people who are not complying to restrictions, but people have been protesting for about a month to ease restrictions. And now the thing is, if government has resources, the government can police restrictions, but government is not policing restrictions anymore. Government is easing up restrictions, and the reason is the economic hit, which is we are seeing due to corona. Right now, we have more than 2 million people who are on our welfare and social benefit system, and about our 20% of the currency, which is Australian dollar, has depreciated against American dollar. So that is the imminent hit. And now we are going towards the trade war with China. China is imposing tariff since we are an ally of America. So government cannot hold restrictions due to the economic hit of corona. So it is not that government is giving in and government is giving up due to the protest. It is that due to the economic hit, government is not able to pull along. So just imagine that our GDP is very small, and our our exports are, well, pretty much Australia is a commodity-based export country. We export mining, we export commodities, iron, cobalt, copper to China. And if we have a trade war coupled with Corona, Australia is not going to hold up, and our economic and our social system will collapse. So, what at this stage, government is saying that we will cut down on social welfare system after 3 months. Earlier, they said that the government is in a place that they can hold up their social welfare system for about 6 months. But now, due to the trade and tensions with China and due to the Corona hit, to the Corona impact on the economy, government is saying that even after 20% depreciation of Australian dollar, they cannot hold up for more than 3 months. So imagine the welfare and the health payments and the welfare payments which people are getting, they will be halved, they will be cut back to 50% after 3 months. So that is the impact.
You mentioned China. I mean, China is the largest trading partner of Australia. So there's a little bit of tension between you and China diplomatically, because China is saying that Australia has called for an investigation. Australia says they're calling for a worldwide investigation. China is saying that Australia is outright accusing them of having been the originator of the COVID disease, and so they're taking affront to that. So what is going on along those lines and those tensions?
All right, so pretty much Australia is dependent upon China when it comes to export. It's pretty much because one of our largest industries in Australia is the education industry, and in education industry, most of the Chinese students, we have the most of the population as of Chinese students, and then our biggest export is the mining and the commodities, iron ore, and again, China is one of our biggest clients. And since Australia is an ally of America, Australia has called out an investigation. I don't know why they did that. They would have, since the trade war with America and China has been going on for more than a year, they should have strategized themselves. They should have seen what would be the impact if they called for an investigation. And now we are being punished by China. And if you see that China has posed in certain China has posed up to 80% tariff duty on certain exports of Australia to China, and it is going to put more restrictions and more trade tariffs. And the last nail on the coffin would be the iron ore. So if iron ore, they put restrictions on iron ore pretty much. So, and now you see the Australian Reserve Bank has downsized its interest rates to more than 200 points. We have depreciated our currency. All these measures, when you depreciate your currency, your exports become cheaper. So that is the strategy of reviving your economy. When you lower your interest rate, it has a gravity effect on the stock market. But even all those measures are not working. And you can see that the government is panicking. Government does not have enough resources to give to its welfare system. So if China does not, if China has a trade war with Australia, pretty much we will see another 20 to 30% depreciation of our Australian dollar. And even then, it is not, we are not sure that whether our exports are competitive in the international market, because the largest international buyer or client is China. We will have our commodities to sell into the international market, but we will not have a buyer, because the amount of iron ore, the amount of agriculture exports we have, there is no other potential buyer to take our commodities. So
what about contact tracing? I hear that the Australian government has put out an application for people to trace, so they can trace contacts. New Zealand's done something similar. I think your app is based on that Singapore Singapore's app, and we all know that Singapore has done an admirable job of containing the COVID outbreak as well. How are people feeling about this app that could trace? I mean, they say it's not going to trace their movements or their location, and it's only going to be used for healthcare, but it's obviously some sort of an invasion of privacy. So Fahad, I'm also hearing that the Australian government has put out an app so that they can trace contact throughout the community. There's a lot of controversy around that in the West as well, in terms of having this ability to trace citizens' movements. Now, obviously, they say they don't trace location, and they're only using it for healthcare information. But it's obviously some sort of a invasion of privacy. This is a model, I think, that Singapore, this app that you're using in Australia, is based on a Singaporean application. So what are the citizens, what are people's feelings about this application?
All right, exactly. You're right that this is a Singaporean and Taiwanese model, which is very effective, and that is in line with the strategy, which is the smart lockdown. All right, and in Singapore and in Taiwan, you pretty much you need to comply with that policy. You need to download that app. That is mandated by the government. Here in Australia, that is not mandated. It's a discretion, which you can. It's your choice to install that app or not. That is one thing. All right. And if I give you the example of my company, so we do not endorse that application because it conflicts with our the privacy policy of our company. But if someone wants to do it, they can do it on their personal phones. We do not allow that COVID safe app on our official phones, since they are not transparent how they gather information, how they keep their information, how they encrypt the information, and where it is stored, and how they eliminate or terminate that that information. That is the one area. And the other is and with all that, the application is very popular in Australia. People are still using it, and it is popular. So people are not against the applications, and it gives you smart lockdown. It helps in smart lockdown, and so that is one thing. But the bottom line is the application itself is not stable. So the application had teething problems, and now every now and then the government will come up and say that now the application is stable, but it's not. It is still having teething problems. So that is with the application. But again, since we live in a democracy, and it is the private information or the breach of privacy laws, which are deeply entrenched in our democratic manifesto, I don't think that no Western country can mandate such application or such things to their citizens. It can only be mandated in Singapore and Taiwan or in Thailand, which are not, well, they are not exactly democracies, simply to put it that way. But here, applications is quite popular.
Yeah, in Australia and New Zealand and Canada as well, trust in government, especially federal government, has never been higher. We, here also feel that it's been well handled by our government in terms of taking care of the citizen. And I think that's generally the feeling in both Australia and New Zealand as well. Exactly. What do you think that coming out of this pandemic, and as restrictions are lifted and as economies struggle to get back on track, what kind of changes do you think are going to be happening in Australia in terms of how people work, how people purchase their goods, how people travel and move around? What kind of changes are people anticipating?
All right, so I have COVID Safe app on my personal phone. I use it. My wife has COVID Safe app. And what after COVID? So right now, if you see one of the biggest accounting firms or the services providers in Australia, they have laid off 20% of their workforce. And for example, the big accounting KPMG has laid down almost 20%. They have reduced the salaries for more than 10%. As it's a flat rate, they have. You can find the latest stats in the news of what they're doing. So that is the generally big companies are moving towards laying off. They are moving towards, cutting salaries. And on top of, and that is happening on top of 20% of the depreciation hit that which Australian dollar has seen. So just imagine that your salary is reduced by 10 to 20%. And on top of that, Australian dollar has lost its value for more than 20%. That's a 40% hit straight away. And the property prices are crashing right now. Property market is crashing, as since economics. The CDO, the collateralized debt obligations are failing right now. The insurers are failing right now. So minimum hit, if in a layman term, the minimum hit, this economy is going to have a minimum hit of 30 to 40%. And after that, if we don't go into a trade war with China, only after that the economy is going to recover. And how long that takes, that's a question mark. We do not have any precedents of how to deal with such pandemic. China never came into context before that. So we can only guess. So probably the optimistic guess is the economy is going to suffer in the lines of 20 to 30%. And if we don't have a trade war or trade tension with China, we'll see that economy will be back on its feet into 3 to 4 years of time. But the next 3 or 4 years are going to be very tough. We'll have the companies are going to file for bankruptcy, even though the government has put many companies into hibernation. Government has put the construction industry into hibernation. But when the government is going to ease the restrictions, when government is going to stop payments, when government is going to say to the insurers, and when government is going to pull the plug, we are going to see many bankruptcies. Many small businesses will die. So this is what is going to happen, and we'll have a new normal, you can say, regime, which is working from home. So working from home and flexible working hours is going to be the new normal after COVID. That is going to stay, since many of the companies are learning that working from home and having flexible hours of working is more productive than having your workforce at a single place at a single time and police them and having their roll call or having their attendance at a regular interval. So even small companies are seeing that flexible hour of working and the working from home can be more productive. So this is what is going to happen. And probably after next 3 or 4 years, we are going to see economy coming back to its original state. So that is in short what is going to happen. But again, nothing is for sure. This COVID is not comparable to Spanish flu, because Spanish flu came when the world was not a globalization village. So it came before globalization, and it came before China. It came before the euro and the globalized economies. So even it is unprecedented. So
Absolutely, this is unprecedented. It's very hard to predict what would happen, what's going to happen, what the fallout's going to be of this worldwide pandemic. I think the only thing that we can be assured of is that there's going to be shifts and changes unlike anything ever before, and that we'll have to prepare for those, and that people will have to change their approach to working, to consuming, to travel. I think we're all assessing, and governments across the world are assessing changes to that as well. Thanks so much, Fahad, for joining me and sharing your insights. I really enjoyed it. Anything else that you wanted to add at the end? Anything else that, oh, you know what, I wanted to talk about this guy in Adelaide. Did you hear about this guy trying to return $10,000 worth of toilet paper and sanitizer, and he got rejected by the store manager? I love that story. What's any inside scoops on that story?
So yeah, so people literally panicked when they announced that we have an outbreak in the society. So people panicked, and people hoard staff, and people. I don't know why people went. There was a blitz, and all together people were heading towards the shopping market, and they were hoarding staff, and this is quite normal. It's not an isolated case. It happened to. And people now, and now if you see that people are now selling off their stuff, they're over their inventory on eBay, on Amazon. But the thing is, they all of that stuff has an expiry date, so most of that stuff is now expired. So good luck.
Well, toilet paper doesn't have
Selling it out on
expiry
eBay.
date, but the interesting thing with this case in Adelaide was that, this guy's eBay site was taken down. He sent out 20 people to go buy up all the toilet paper and sanitizer they could find. So he bought up $10,000 worth so that he would sell it at a significant markup on eBay. But eBay shut down any sites that they felt were price gouging. So he had nowhere to sell his goods. So then he went back to the store to try to return them, and was told by the store manager
Manager, yes.
that too bad, you're stuck with this stuff, because he's not willing to support somebody who was looking to benefit off of the pandemic and price gouge people.
Yes, the toilet paper does not have an expiry, but it does, catches moisture. And if you don't store it in a very specialized place,
Yeah.
it is be of no use after 3 or 4 months.
Well, $10,000 worth of anything, people would have to have storage space for it for long-term storage. Also, too, I mean, he must have realized that the window to sell his goods wasn't going to be very large as well. So, anyway, I just thought that was a good feel-good story to end off on.
Yes,
Thanks so much for your time, Fahad, today, and thanks for sharing your
no
insights.
worries. All right, thanks.